Randall, would you lead a prayer to start class? Thank you, sir. Let's do that first tonight, and then we'll discuss a little bit of what's here on the screen. Go ahead. Thank you.
Father in heaven, we're so thankful to be able to come together in the middle of the week, meet with other servants and members of the body of Christ. We thank you, Father, for your Son as our Savior, that he came and sacrificed himself, that we might be forgiven of our sins. We ask for your mercy with great confidence, knowing that by nature you are merciful and full of grace. Father, we thank you for the time to come together and study from your word on this topic. We pray, Father, that we might have a greater understanding of all the things that you reveal in your word, but especially tonight as we study the difficulty and the challenges and the grief that often come with the parts of this life that we experience so often. Please be with Dan and the other teachers tonight, and bless them and bless us with open ears and open hearts, that we might receive this message and apply it to our lives in the way that we interact with one another. In Jesus, we ask that you would accept our prayer.
Amen. Thank you very much. Okay, I had promised that there would be some more books ordered. Oh, perfect, brother. I got you right here. I'm saving that one for somebody specific, but you can have this one. Okay. I have exactly 2 more copies available because they got here on like Monday and they were claimed mostly by today. So there's that one, and I have one more that you can have at the end of class. So it's you, okay? Because it's my book for tonight because my kids lost mine. So, so you can have mine at the end of class, and then I'll interrogate children later, okay? So that's the plan with that. Okay, so we are going to be looking at basically 2 chapters out of that book tonight, which is chapters 5 and 8. We're going to be looking at the concepts that are from there, and we're going to do a fair amount of Bible reading tonight as well. So I hope you have both of those books handy with you for this evening. It's going to be hopefully an encouraging thing for us. But let me just ask you to reflect on this quote that you see here on the screen to kind of get us started. Hopefully as you came in, you took some time to read it and think about it a little bit. Just reflect on that. Does it sound familiar? Does it sound right or wrong? Are there any particular terms that come to mind as like, that sounds like this thing that I heard about in college psychology class or something like that? What do you have? And I'm not digging for anything specific here at all, so this is your chance to just reflect on it as you think. Miss Terry.
I have a friend who lost her husband about 6 months before I lost mine. And one of the things that we talked about were what we call sneaker waves. When you're going along and everything is wonderful, and all of a sudden, out of nowhere, something hits you.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, okay, is that going to always be there?
Yeah.
Or is that going to go away someday?
Yeah. That's, okay, that's fair. That sounds familiar to me too. Okay. Anybody else? Is that me? Huh. I didn't even do anything. Okay, I'm trying to be good with microphones, so I got to leave it alone, not mess with it. Anybody else? Any other thoughts on it? Okay. Obviously, so this is from C.S. Lewis's book, A Grief Observed, which we've made reference to a couple of different times, okay? And obviously, this is while he is in the midst of dealing with the feelings of grief, okay? So this is not like while he lost his wife. They married each other later in life, and they were not married for very long at all, and then she passed from cancer. And so this is his description of a lot of what it was like for him living in the middle of that. And I think it's the first line that catches my attention, especially when we're talking about what we're going to discuss tonight, that nothing seems to stay put, okay? And I think that's an interesting kind of concept, that there's just these things that there's kind of a fluctuation. There's an emotional turbulence. There's kind of something cyclical, but there's also kind of a progress at the same time with all this, with dealing with these things psychologically and emotionally. and spiritually for that matter. And I thought of this quote because of talking about the stages of grief, right? And we've talked already in this class that those are familiar enough, I think, to all of us who have experienced grief, but they're also not a formula. They're not a system, like a linear progression that you hit this and you stay there for a month, and then the next one you stay there for a month, and then it's not like that, okay? And I think just Lewis, for having been such a meticulous writer and for having been so controlled and so near perfect with his words in so many other instances, for him to write like this, where it feels kind of turbulent and undefined, it just tells you a little bit about what that process is like, okay? And so that's kind of the laying the groundwork for where we're going with a little bit of our class later on this evening, especially when we talk about chapter 8. But I wanted to talk about this first tonight, even though it's really not a pleasant way at all to start a class, but here we go. I wanted to do this because I promised we would do it last time. I said last week that we were discussing the hope that we have as God's people when we have lost someone that we have every reason to have confidence that they were saved by their faith in Christ. They were saved by Christ because of their faith in Him, okay? But somebody had asked me to talk about how do we cope with the deaths of unsaved loved ones? And this is a really important question, I think, for people of faith, because when Paul writes 1 Thessalonians 4 and he says, we don't grieve as people who have no hope, he is talking to that church about having lost members of their own church family. And so he says that earlier in the letter, that those who have fallen asleep, we have some hope because we believe in the resurrection. And so he explains all that to them. But you start first. What do you think is part of give me some part of an answer to this. How do we cope with the deaths of unsaved loved ones? Okay. Okay. So there's a little bit of distance that we kind of get to make between us and that situation by just trusting that God has it under control and He will do what is right. Okay? Fair enough. I'll give you that. I think you're right about that. Okay? And by the way, I did ask for any part of this answer because I don't think this is one thing that gets one answer that completely, defines it. So parts of this answer. Okay? What else? Being biblically informed as we are, what else can we say as an answer to this, Miss Linda?
I can't control the decisions of another adult.
Okay. So yeah, part of coping is just knowing that it wasn't up to me. Okay? For sure. I cannot control the decisions of another adult. Okay? What else? Miss Molly. Of course. Mm-hmm. 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 Yep. Yeah, which kind of goes back to what Miss Donna was saying first. You fully put this in the hands of God and just trust whatever He does on the other side, it's right. And we may not know what that is. Okay, Riley? Yeah. Now you don't know. Okay. Now let me just point out. I agree. There are plenty of aspects to this, plenty of facets to this, to where we just will not know. Let me ask you this though: is it conceivable that there is somebody for whom you clearly know, to their dying breath, they refused to believe in Jesus? To their dying breath, they refused to believe in Jesus. That's not far-fetched at all, y'all. Okay, I can cite you 3 cases off the top of my head, one of them in my family tree. Okay, so it's not far-fetched at all. How do we cope in a situation like that? Because we're comforted by the situations where it may have been a little hard to tell. But in that one, you can tell. You know, don't you? And we're hesitant to say it, but we know. So then what do we do? How do we cope when it's truly someone that we're convinced they were not saved by Jesus because they never asked Jesus to save them in any form, whether it was right, all the way committed to what he's asked of us or not, in any form, they have denied him. Then what do we do? All right, Elisa, you get to be the one to answer here before I start moving on. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah. Randall? By the way, what she just said is going to be the next thing that comes up on the slides. That's where I was going with this. Yeah, I think that's one of the most important realizations we can have from this question. Yeah, Randall?
Well, when that happens, I mean, my heart really goes out to those that are still here.
Yeah.
Right? So one of the things I always think about is the account of the rich man and Lazarus.
Oh, good. That's what, yeah, okay, good, yeah.
Right? And this person that has passed, by that illustration in there, is still who they are, still love the people that are on earth, and wherever that person is at, there's 2 accounts, both of them are still who they are. And what would be the message that we get from that? Wherever they're at, that was based on their choices, but they love you, and what they would like you to do is turn to the Lord.
Yeah. Yeah, so thank you. That's what I was going to say about the first thing that Elisa said. Yes, I think that's right. When you think about it through the filter of now that person has clarity on how things really are, lost or saved, they have clarity. Okay, what would they want to say to us if they could? And we have an example that would tell us, which is the rich man asking, can someone go back from the dead and go save these people? And then, of course, Abraham says, they've already got the message that will save him. They have Moses and the prophets. Let them hear them, But you both are right. That ought to motivate. Number one, if there's any answer that ought to sink in with us to this question, it is that it ought to motivate us to persuade men to believe in Christ. Men and women, okay? Obviously, I mean both. But that's the idea here is Paul, that's what Paul says according to can you help me with the quote, is because of the fear of the Lord. The terror of the Lord, yeah. We persuade men. Yeah. And so anyway, that's the reference right there from 2 Corinthians 5. It ought to motivate us to actually reach out, share the good news of Jesus, and try to get people saved, okay? Now, second part of this from me, piece of advice for those of us who have to ask this question in a very personal kind of way. Second piece of advice is we do not put our faith in people, either for this world or for the next. And so I know that we long to think of them as in heaven, but if all godly wisdom tells us they're not, we still have our faith in God, not in that person. Our faith and our connection and our grounding in reality was never in them in the first place. And so if we have lost the hope of ever seeing them again when we get to the other side, it's so sad. But our hope has not been changed if it's grounded and anchored in God himself. Okay? And I said this just now, so here it is. The reality is, though, this is a very sad situation for those of us whose faith is real. When we truly trust in God and we believe that someone who is not saved, and we again, all godly wisdom tells us that a person is not saved and they've passed from this life, we do just kind of have to face the sadness head on, And by the way, the Lord did not leave us alone in that. This passage that I reference right here in Luke chapter 19, I don't think that's meant to say 11 through 44. I think maybe that's meant to say 11 through 14. Oh, no. It's meant to say 41 through 44. This is what it says in Luke 19, verses 41 through 44. When the Lord drew near and saw the city, he wept over it, saying, "Would that you, even you, had known on this day the things that make for peace, but now they are hidden from your eyes. For the days will come upon you when your enemies will set a barricade around you and surround you and hem you in on every side and tear you down to the ground, you and your children within you, and they will not leave one stone upon another in you, because you did not know the time of your visitation." What city is he talking about? It's Jerusalem. It's the city of God's own people, at least by his choice, but not by theirs. So when the city is destroyed, it will be destroyed for the immorality of whom? Them, yeah. And so it's one of those situations where Jesus has people that he loves who are lost because they don't recognize him in their lives. And he weeps for that. And that's the right response, because it is very, very sad as God's people when we watch this happen. So yeah, Mickey, what'd you have, brother?
Do you have Jeremiah 8?
Not specifically, but I do have, think about other times in the Bible where God wept for his people that he loved who were lost. And Jeremiah, including the book of Lamentations, is the number one example. The whole thing of Lamentations, it's only 5 chapters, it's 5 poems that are all about how sad it is and how tragic it is that God's people didn't put their faith in him and were lost. And were lost eternally. It's that tragic. So yeah, what is it about chapters 8 and 9 that are particularly focused on this that make you bring it up? Yeah.
The herd of the daughter of my people, I have heard, I mourn, dismay, have taken hold of. Is there no balm in Gilead? Is there no physician there? Why then is not the health of the daughter of my people recovered? And he said he wished he could kind of dig a hole and crawl in.
Yeah.
But he's upset because these people are lost.
Mm-hmm.
In reference to your first question, if I may make a real quick comment.
Absolutely. I could see that too. I really could. And I hope that the way this comes across for all of us is, because we talked about in the first class, what is the reason that grief exists? And then I'll come right to you, okay? What is the reason that grief exists? I think we said this in every class so far, actually. What's that? It's because of the existence of love. It's because God values 2 things, life and love. You see that from day one. He values life and he created love. Okay, he gave us love out of his own nature. Okay, so again, my hope is that when we talk about this, that this is not in any way coming across as like ridiculing or or condescending in any sort of way. That this comes off as, for those of us who truly believe in Jesus, this kind of thing is one of the saddest realities there is, particularly in the case that Mickey's talking about, where you've watched somebody who has had faith in Jesus and chosen to walk away from that. I don't want to say this in any sort of way that sounds callous. This is sad. This is true sadness, and it's important that we not embrace it, but acknowledge it as such. So yeah, Chloe, what'd you have?
Not to downplay the sadness and the grief that comes, but we have several people like that in Iceland that have known the gospel, turned their back, or and our knowledge died in the mistake. One of them is very young.
Mm.
And so one of the things that we talk about a lot is being crucified for the time we did have with them and the lessons that we were able to learn from them from their lives.
Yeah.
And it's a very fun memory because you know that at this that's all
It's gone. Yeah.
and so just finding other people who also love validate that instead of always dwelling on the harder which is hard.
It is, yeah. It is. Yeah, it totally is. But you're right. And I think that is, I'm going to skip a thing here, but I think that's a great segue for us to talk a little bit about tempering the grand sadness of all of this, okay? This is what gets us into the book a little bit. So if you haven't, you want to open to chapter 5, I appreciate that because it's a good exercise for us to not be consumed with grief, okay? And that's really where I wanted to go with the rest of tonight's class, is just making sure that we don't let it in any way consume us, okay? So the guidance of hope is what I'm calling this. And I really enjoyed this particular chapter. I think it's pages 77 and 78 of the book. Yeah, actually it is. What do you know? I was right about a thing for once. Page 77, where there's this long list of these encouraging passages that Brother Lanphier, I think, is writing at this point, that he just kind of noted these were part of the thing that got him through having lost his son, and then having lost his wife a few years after that. And so I just wanted to kind of remind us of these truths here. And so can I get a few volunteers to just work our way through this list and do some reading? Anybody want to volunteer to take Deuteronomy 31? Yeah. Is that right? Yeah, it is. Okay. Anybody want to volunteer to take Deuteronomy 31? Connor, anybody? Isaiah 40, 3 spots down. Okay, Miss Linda. And then Malachi 3:6. All right, Mr. Randall, thank you, sir. And then Hebrews 6, verse 19. All right, Noemi, thank you. Very good. So, these are in there. The trick with reading a bunch of successive Bible passages close together is it feels like, okay, well, we heard that one, now let's hear this one, now let's hear this one, now let's talk. No, we need to make sure and kind of slow that expectation down for just a second here. They're here to remind us to just ponder these things, to let these truths sink in, So anyway, can I get a volunteer to read? Who's got Deuteronomy? Connor, was that you? Okay, thanks. Okay. In Hebrews 13, that's the one that's quoted, I think, more readily familiar to our ears as, I will never leave you nor forsake you. Now, it's kind of neat because, like Deuteronomy, he says it in the plural. He says it to the entire nation of people. But in Hebrews, he says it as a whole group and as individuals as well, that he will never leave each one of us and forsake us. Just super cool, super encouraging. Okay, the next one was Isaiah, I think.
Have you not known, have you not heard? The Lord is the everlasting God, the creator of the ends of the earth. He does not faint or grow weary, his understanding is unsearchable.
Okay, So kind of talking about his unchanging nature and his entire supremacy over everything, okay? Hey, Miss Terry, your iPad's trying to hijack my screen.
I know, sorry.
That's okay. Let's do the next one. What was the next one I gave? Malachi.
Malachi 3:6.
Yes, sir.
For I, the Lord, do not change. Therefore you, O children of Jacob, are not consumed.
Okay. Saying the same thing essentially about God. And then the next one from Hebrews chapter 6. Noemi.
19.
Yes, ma'am.
We have this as a sure and steadfast anchor of the soul, a hope that enters into the deep place of unbelief.
Okay. So the anchor, the hope, okay, the surety is the ideas that are being communicated there. So putting this together, I mean, if all of those speak to God's unchanging nature, what is the comfort in that? What's that? Okay. So yeah, it's a standard. It's something that you can camp on. I like that. What's the comforting side of it when we're talking about times of grief? Okay, for sure. Yeah, Miss Edie? Yeah. Yeah, especially when I'm emotional. Especially when I'm an emotional wreck, my thinking is not very clear. It is good to know that he is emotionally invested in us and he does not change in truth and in justice. So yeah, it's a great way to put that. Thank you. Yes, ma'am.
Even if you're angry with them and keeping them at arm's length for a while, he's still going to be there when you're ready.
Yeah. Isn't that good to know? If you don't love the hymn "Abide with Me," you totally should. Okay. That's just a little free piece of advice from Dan. You totally should love that hymn because that's part of that sentiment right there, is that even during the emotional times where we don't feel like staying close to him, he stays close to us. The promise is, I will never leave you or forsake you. And he doesn't change. His goodness is himself. So that's the comfort in this, is if he was good at some point, he is good now, even while I'm hurting. And that's really, really good news. Randall.
This just makes me think of something that comes up with couples, and that is that their spouse is not always the same, and they're not sure which spouse they're going to come home to that night. One of them wants to come home to, and the other one they're like, well, I wish I knew, I'd go someplace else. What we hear is, we know who God is.
Yes.
God is always.
Yes.
And once we know him, we know whenever we go through the door, that's what we get.
Yeah, in that marriage, we are the one that's the unpredictability. Yeah, but you're exactly right. Now that's a pinpoint perfect way to say that kind of comfort. That's really what it is. Write that down. Not the go someplace else part, but everything else that he said. Yeah. Okay. Now, here's the other reality that I thought was really wonderful and helpful out of chapter 6, is that God also cares when we suffer, and he is open about this in plenty of places as well. Okay. Can I get a volunteer to be in Psalm number 34 and another one to be in Matthew 11, and then I'll read from Revelation. All right. Riley's got Psalms. Anybody want to volunteer for Matthew? Oh, my bad. I'm looking at two different screens and I got them out of sync. I'm sorry. All right, Scott's got the next one from Matthew 11. It's verses 28 through 30, okay? And then I'm going to read Revelation 21. All right, go ahead, Riley. Okay. It's not far from that in the Psalms, where he also says that I have never seen the righteous forsaken or the seed of God, his children, out begging for bread. Remember that passage? It's a familiar enough verse, okay, a familiar enough sentiment. But the comfort in that, it's kind of like the idea from Deuteronomy. There are certain things that God said to the children of Israel that are always going to apply to the people who believe in him, whether Old Testament or New, you know. And that section that Riley just read is one of those. All right, Scott, would you mind reading from Matthew 11 from the Lord himself?
Verse 28, come to me, all who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you, and learn from me, for I am gentle and lowly in heart, and you will find rest for your soul. For my yoke is easy, and my burden is light.
Yeah. It makes a good hymn because it's such a beautiful promise. It's so good. And it is one of those things that when somebody promises you that, and then they rise from the dead, and you know they're not going to die, you know you can trust that. You know? Yes, thank you for the amen back there. I appreciate that. You're exactly right. That's one of those things that we all hang on to for dear life sometimes. My yoke is easy, my burden is light. Come to me if you are weary and heavy laden, and you will find rest for your soul. It's a beautiful promise. Yes, sir.
I think going back to the first question, this kind of ties some of that together for me too, where Jesus knew that we were going to be sorrowful.
Yeah.
He was sorrowful that there were people who rejected him, more people rejected him than accepted him. Right? He knew they were going to be lost. He knew that they were going to accept him. He's saying here, regardless of that, my yoke is easy, my burden is light. You will find rest.
Yeah.
And we know that rest in Revelation 21 is that there'll be no pain. There'll be no sorrow. I don't know how that works.
Mm-hmm.
That your spouse may be not saved, and that person you spend time with all your life may not be in heaven. But Jesus said that rest,
Mhm.
I will wipe away the tears.
Here, yep, here it is. He will wipe away every tear from their eyes, and death shall be no more. What a statement, by the way. Death shall be no more. Neither shall there be mourning, nor crying, nor pain anymore, for the former things have all passed away. Yeah. It totally is, but it's such a gift. Such a gift from God, okay? So I put it in these terms here, and I hope this is helpful for you to think about, that the joy that we have in God is both a gift to be received through so many of these promises, and it's also an act of will to be sought in these promises. That we remember in these hard times, like my faith was not ever entirely in that person that is now gone anyway. Even if they were truly wonderful and they embodied the Spirit of Christ in themselves, my faith was never in that person. It was an act of will all the way through my life to put my faith in Him. And He will never leave me nor forsake me, right? It's hard. It's hard to wrap your mind around it, but it comes with practice and time, and the more we devote ourselves to this ideal. It's a beautiful thought, okay? All right, Ashley. Mm-hmm. Yeah. 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 And that's okay. Right? I mean, there's this kind of weird dichotomy where we're continually growing in knowledge as people who seek God, but we're also continually recognizing the fact that I will trust where knowledge does not exist or where I can't attain it. You know what I mean? I will let trust fill that gap. Side note, bit off script, but here I go. Farther along, we'll know all about it. Farther along, we'll understand why. Can I tell you my hunch? Farther along, we'll forget all about it. Farther along, we'll quit caring why. That's probably more likely, you know? And I think that's kind of Ashley's point right there. You let trust fill the gap. You let faith take you over those things where you don't know, you know? And it is a strong enough vehicle when that faith is in God Himself. It is a strong enough vehicle to cross the chasms. And when we let that happen, we will get there. And maybe we will know everything, and maybe we'll have perfect clarity for everything we ever wondered about on this side. Or maybe we'll be so consumed with being in the presence of God, we won't care anymore. And either one would be fine. That's it, you know. So anyway, there we go. Okay, let's talk a little bit about this idea of stages of grief. If you have the book, move over to chapter 8 and kind of think about that a little bit as far as what you read there. Okay, this is the way that the stages of grief are described, sort of toward the beginning of that chapter. This is. Again, the two authors of this book, David and Wilson. This is Wilson writing this, and kind of, encapsulating each one of these stages with a short little phrase of kind of what goes through our minds. But I think what's important for us to talk about in that chapter, and what's important for us to talk about, especially kind of Chloe helped us to turn this corner and go in this direction tonight, is not getting stuck in the first 4 of these 5 stages, okay? It's not bad that we experience them. It is a problem if we get stuck in them and we let them define us. And that's really something that I think is an important part of this discussion, okay? So I'm going to leave them up there because they're important for us. They're a helpful reference. But let's just ask and answer a few questions about this whole concept of recovering through the grief process, okay? Because I think this is one of those deals, like, if I'm reading an audience correctly, I don't know, maybe this is you, maybe it wasn't, but when I said we're going to have a class on grief, I bet at some point you were expecting we were going to talk about how to move on, right? How to let it not weigh us down anymore. Yeah, I mean, at some point that is part of the equation, because it's when we let that define us that we're no longer letting Christ define us. And that's why it's important for us to not get stuck in any particular stage. Yeah, Brother Jim, what you got?
I was thinking of Matthew 7:21.
Okay.
Not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven, but he who does the will of my Father who is in heaven will enter. Many will say to me on that day, Lord, Lord, did we not prophesy in your name, and in your name cast out demons, and in your name perform many miracles? And then I will declare to them, I never knew you. Depart from me, you who practice lawlessness.
Yeah, there you go. I mean, that goes with our first question tonight. You kind of have to just acknowledge the Lord said that will happen. And we have to learn how to do that, deal with that reality, and also keep moving in life. And that's hard. But hopefully some of this will help. Okay, so let me just ask and answer a handful of questions about this whole idea of getting stuck in some of these different stages, except for the final one, which I think is a healthy point. So this first one, is moving on supposed to happen quickly or slowly? Oh, good. You've read the charts. Yes. The answer is yes. Okay, because this is how I do things. It is okay if it happens slowly, as long as you're not stuck. Now, how are you going to know the difference? Different people are going to judge that differently. I'm just telling you, pray for wisdom, okay? And read the Bible a lot, and you will gain more. Sometimes it happens more slowly, okay? We talked about that in the very first class. Grief is an individual thing. Sometimes it happens more slowly, and we look at somebody and we go, what is wrong with them? And then sometimes it happens really quickly, and they don't seem sad at all, and we go, what is wrong with them? Listen, that's us picking a sweet spot for somebody else. I don't think that's right, okay? The answer is yes. It is supposed to happen either quickly or slowly, okay? And so when we talk about moving on, it happens at an individual pace as long as there is movement in a trusting direction, okay? I ran out of room to put that in there, but always moving in the direction of trust, that our trust is in God, okay? So add to that, grief affects Christians, but it cannot define us. Grief affects Christians, but we cannot let it cripple us, okay? And this, I think, is one of the reasons that we struggle, and we, by the way, we seem to, as a community, as believers at large, we seem to always find fault in someone who is grieving in some way. It's because we want them to move slower or move faster or do this differently. And we got to learn to be as forgiving as is righteous to be forgiving, wherever somebody's at in this process and whatever speed they're going. We check on them, we help them, we support them and pray with them and love on them, and we ask them, are you moving in a faith-filled direction? Is your heart fully still devoted to God? And as long as the answer to that is yes, and we can still see the fruit of that in their lives, then we hold them up and we let them grieve. Or we let them not grieve. Either's okay. Yes, ma'am? Yeah. Yeah. That's true. Yeah, things that are lost. Yeah, absolutely. So, by the way, next week we are going to start talking a little bit about divorce, and this is going to be the same when it comes to that. Some people go through a divorce and it's like, wow, I can't believe anything happened to them. They seem fine. And then other people go through a divorce and you go, seriously, how long is this going to take? Listen, let's not do either of those, okay? Let's not do either of those. We need to have the respect to let these things be as long as they be righteous, okay? Bad grammar intended. There you go. Okay, is moving on a sign of disrespect to the deceased? Thoughts on this one, yes or no? No, it is not inherently. And often it's quite the opposite. Often moving on is a sign of appreciation for the love that you had before, right? So you seek it again. It's not to say that it was no good and now I'm finally getting what I wanted. No, it's not that. It's that my life was really good as a married person, and now that I'm widowed, I'd like to be a married person again. That happens all the time. Although, just an interesting sociological little note here, men tend to do this one, women tend not to. There's exceptions both directions, okay? But by and large, and the sociology studies will bear this out, women who have lost a good husband will be more likely to wait longer periods of time before they remarry. Women who have lost a scoundrel of a husband will often remarry very quickly. Men are exactly the opposite. If he loses a nagging wife, he will be fine to wait a very long time before he remarries. If he loses a loving wife, he will probably seek love again very soon, right? And they're proportional a lot of times to the quality of the relationship, which is a beautiful kind of thing and also kind of a scary kind of thing at the same time, you know? Just shows how much impact we have on each other. But yeah, it's often a sign of appreciation for having been loved very well, okay? Seriously, that was 5 minutes? Anyway, our memories and talking about the dead and those I've lost, are those keeping me stuck? And the answer is, it depends on our outlook. Are we talking about them from an outlook of despair or from an outlook of appreciation and determination? A lot of times it just depends on our own outlook, and often talking about the people that we loved and lost is a crucial part of moving forward in a healthy and trusting kind of way, okay? That's where I have to stop, just for the respect of the clock, but I hope that some of that's been helpful, and I'll pick up with the rest of these questions on next Wednesday night, and then we'll start talking some about the whole divorce thing. Before I do that, can I ask a favor of you? And whoever's leading our closing prayer, maybe I'll ask them to do this too. You ought to pray for Brother David Lanphier, one of the authors of this book. As he talks about, he lost his wife at one point, which is one of the reasons he is one of the writers of this book. He remarried. Her name was also Debbie, and Debbie passed away last week. So, pray for Brother Lanphier, okay? He's starting to struggle with age as well, and if you know what I mean. And so keep him in your prayers in a very serious kind of way. All right, that's it. Thank you. Thanks for your insights and for just, I don't know, being part of this class. I appreciate it. All right, kiddos, come on in.